Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. Today's interview is about blockchain. It's going to be about potentially talking about Bitcoin, potentially talking about NFTs. It could be about what's referred to, and when I say it is referred to, not by me because I have no idea what this means, but enterprise blockchain. Some of the use cases that go with it. So if you are in pharma, if you are in medical affairs, if you are in MSL, and you just generally want to know more about what any of this means, today's the conversation to listen to. Our guest today is an expert advisor on Pharma Ledger, which is a leading standards body for DCT blockchain security and data interoperability. I can't even say that fast. He's the former chief architect at CDC. He's the CEO of Acor. He actually worked with me at a previous job, probably one of the world's experts on blockchain and on what's called DLT, or distributed ledger technology. Our guest for today is Jim Nasr. This is the Darshan Talks live stream. I'm your host, Darshan Kulkarni. I'm an attorney. I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies on FDA-regulated products. Jim and I, Jim is an expert on blockchain and life sciences, but neither of us is giving you any legal advice, regulatory advice, clinical advice, or blockchain-based advice or technology advice. This is for educational purposes only. These are considerations. They don't necessarily reflect the opinions of the host, the guest, or our employers or clients. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. Always reach out, ask questions. You can actually find me on Twitter at Darshan Talks. Go to our website at darshantalks.com. You can also find Jim on LinkedIn at Jim Nasr, or on Twitter at JNasr. Or you can just go to his website, acor.com, and I will make sure I flash that throughout so that those people who are viewing this on YouTube or LinkedIn can see this as well. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Hey, Darshan. Good to see you again. Happy New Year and happy MLK Day. So, yeah, doing well. Thank you.
Well, happy MLK Day. Today is the day to give back. Today is the day to make sure that we create a more equitable world. And what better day to talk about this than we talking about DLTs and talking about a more equitable solution to a lot of the world's problems. So let's start from the beginning. What are the trends you're seeing in blockchain? And should we talk about blockchain, or is blockchain the wrong word to use?
Yeah, well, I'm a little bit pedantic about use of specific words. So I think it's more than blockchain. I think, we've spoken about this before, so I'm not going to belabor it. Blockchain is a specific manifestation of a larger set of technologies and ideas called distributed ledger technologies. So I think that's a better place to be. Blockchain, strictly speaking, is about technologies that, for instance, Bitcoin is built on, and it's about chains of blocks of data that are chained together. But that's not it. There's more to it. So that's, I think, clear. But there's a lot going on, right? There's a lot happening in the space. I think last time we spoke, and continues, that there's quite a bit around non-fungible tokens and this content creator community, kind of community and initiatives, particularly around music and art and things like this. Though it's certainly goes beyond that. But there's also, I think, quite a bit going on around just tokenization in general. There's a lot going on with cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin included, but more than that, the idea of altcoins, or not the idea, but the kind of the market, if you like, for altcoins. So there's a lot going on with that. And then I think the area that we obviously focus on really is much more around what I think of as real implementations of particularly public distributed ledger technologies for enterprises. Most of our clients are, enterprises, large, medium size, some startups, but typically in the larger size, and particularly in the healthcare, life sciences space. And what they look for is, how can they use distributed ledger technologies in a way that enhances what they're already doing, but perhaps provides more, maybe a little bit more transparency, provides a little more compliance. There's some very tangible benefits of using distributed ledger technologies. This idea of like proof of transactions using cryptography. I think, again, we have spoken about it, a verification of a transaction, proofing of actions, that something actually happened as somebody says it did, particularly amongst people or entities that don't really know each other, right? If you and I know each other, we have a long history, or we have contractual agreements, you could argue that there's really no reason for some kind of cryptography to prove whether or not, we had a conversation, and you make a good point. But the reality is that's not the case for many use cases, right? And, you can have people that don't know each other. And anyway, all to say, I think that there's some really good, at least from our perspective, some really good innovations and advancements on making that real. And it's this idea of what I call abstraction, where you abstract, the pillars of what amounts to a truth system, right? More cryptography for truth and less intermediaries, and make it usable, make it absorbable for enterprises to pick up, as opposed to have a significant amount of expertise and infrastructure in doing it themselves, which is not easy. So all these things are kind of going on. There's a lot going on. It's a big space. I think also you've probably seen this in the news, that there's a tremendous amount of investments, in VCs. You've heard from, any big company like Crypto.com, and there's many other ones, and all these exchanges are growing bigger and bigger, and and they're providing collateralized lending for people who have crypto, like Celsius and Nexo and all these. There's a bunch of them. So I mean, the space is really, really hot. I think the big thing remains, and this is what I would encourage all of your listeners and people on the call is really do some thinking and contemplate what's noise versus signal, because there's quite a lot of noise.
So you're talking about noise versus signal. You're talking about seeing value and identifying the appropriate value. One of the questions I have for you is, you and I have been talking about blockchain and the role of blockchain and DLTs in pharma now at least for 3 years, and that conversation has been going on several years before you and I started having these conversations. And I know a lot of startups and a lot of mid-sized companies are going, yes, this is the direction we want to go, because that's where the ball's going to be. To quote, what's his name? Wayne Gretzky, don't look at where the puck is, look at where the puck's going to be. My question to you is, I'm looking at where the puck is this second. Do you see large pharma actually doing things in DLT the second, or is it more, what is the future going to look like so far?
Yeah, well, look, let's be honest. Yeah, in my opinion, but I think there's plenty of empirical evidence to back this up over a course of 50 years, not just last day or two or a year or two. Pharma's not going to want to do this, right?
Okay.
Quite clearly, they don't. Okay. I think that the opaqueness, helps to have price monopolies and have, and be able to essentially do things that are incredibly inefficient and more or less get away with it, right? And I'm not talking about any one company; it's an industry-wide thing. We've seen healthcare, it's so. Why would any company want to voluntarily do this? I think the answer is they probably wouldn't if you look at the financial incentives or disincentives. However, there's some new factors that are coming in. And I think, to me, the biggest thing, and I've been thinking about this a lot over the last several months, but certainly of recent times with the holidays, as I had time to kind of contemplate, just again, I think we all have to recharge and just do our homework, right? Because the space moves. So look, we're in a space where I think this idea that, for instance, in healthcare, it's just a B2B type of scenario, or just a B2C, is no longer true. I think it's much more of a B2B to C. There is an individual in there, right? And regardless of all of the, kind of, I guess, hyperbole and sound bites about being patient-oriented and things like this, there's plenty of evidence, again, that's been largely just talk, that the actions, certainly the actions that manifest in people's like bonuses, like the big CEOs bonuses, and again, we have personal experience with this, they just don't manifest that. That's just not reflected in those actions. But I think now there's particularly from regulators and other outside pressures, and maybe it's fear of missing out, and also, frankly, individuals finally understanding that they have a say in this, and there are laws that actually directly kind of support them, right? Whether it's GDPR, whether it's TCPA, whether it's kind of like the what's going on with FIRE and enabling individual secret data. So I think there's an understanding that actually it's not just one business. Like if you look at the supply chain for kind of generic drugs, which is what you and I worked on a lot back in the day, that it's not just the two businesses or a business and its partner CROs or whatever being involved, that there is actually a consumer. Certainly is the case for clinical research, right? We see this a lot. And again, we always hear, well, clinical recruitment is very expensive. It's hard to find, the demographics of people you're looking for and all of this, but there's a systematic reason for it, right? And I think people are finally seeing, well, look, we can do it better. And I think there's this idea of kind of, well, we can use data and big data. That's been the thing that people have thrown around and have spoken about. But fundamentally, that's not it. It's much more about engaging with individuals, right? Big data can direct you down somewhere, but big data isn't the thing that's going to engage you or provide incentivizations for like me as a potential recruit to engage, right? So all to say, I think that's what I'm seeing. I see this like B2B to C, kind of continuum emerging, which I think is then another reason, not the only reason, but another reason why somebody, particularly some of these forward-looking farmers, and particularly some of the new, if you like, the new entrants and the more modern digitized entrants and the new CROs may want to do this because it allows them to differentiate, it allows them to be compliant, but it also allows them to actually build, and I think to me this is a very, very important concept, build direct relationships with individuals, because I think we're beginning to understand with this Web 3.0 world that the individual engaging with individuals and understanding that there are rights that have to be maintained and at least monitored, and the individual also recognizing that that's the future. That's what we're talking about. Now, is it going to happen over the next year or two? I mean, definitely not, right? This is a very slow change industry, right? But I think there's also a real opportunity for, Amazonification. Right? There's a real opportunity for some group of companies, and hopefully not Amazon or just Amazon. I think clearly, they have enough, savvy and political and financial capital to make it happen. But other people to kind of get in there and say, look, can we take these ideas of decentralized systems, decentralized architecture, decentralized like way of business, and build off of it and rely on cryptography, rely on computational proof of things, as opposed to just say, here's another intermediary that's going to kind of like act as our trusted, custodian. Because I think that will solve nothing. That will just be like another way of doing almost exactly what we're doing currently. So I'm optimistic. Obviously, you have to be if you're in this space, right? That's kind of the nature of it. But I think what you're seeing is, and again, I refer to the noise with the crypto and all these other things that are going on. But that creates this fear of missing out, right? There's a FOMO element for sure that's going on. But also, frankly, I think it creates an opportunity for individuals, through mass media and other means to kind of see that, whoa, that something is happening that is different to the usual things. Like the fact that, as example, you could have an account with, Celsius, and they might give you 17% interest on your crypto holdings. And good luck comparing that with the 0.01% you're going to get from Wells Fargo, right? I mean, it's the truth. So I think those kind of things are going to permeate people's, or hopefully they're going to enter people's thinking and say, what is really happening? And then understanding that as an individual, they actually, not only do they have rights, but if they're smart enough, if they're engaged enough, they could take those rights and actually use it as a benefit, as a collateral, as a means to hold people accountable, including and especially in the world of clinical research and healthcare, which is, so wildly inefficient and incredibly, I mean, in many ways, it's criminal. Like, we have talked about this. It shouldn't be this bad. For the amount of money that in the United States we spend in the life sciences healthcare space, and for the kind of just horrendous like results that we get, that's, again, empirically, statistically, in the very worst, around the world, something is completely awry, right? I mean, you can't equate the two. It would make no sense. As an example, imagine if I were the business, if like, I'm running a business, right? I'm the CEO, and you're like, as an investor, you're pumping millions and millions of dollars into me, and every year my return is worse and worse. You'd never be in business. I mean, you'd be kicked out. You'd be laughed at. Yet we have kind of created this numbed condition where it's okay to be like this bad at what we do as an industry, right? To me, those things are just like, they have to be addressed. And frankly, people like you and I have to do the addressing, because I don't think the CEO of these companies, they have any incentive to kind of really do that, because clearly they're making a lot of money. They're pretty happy doing what they're doing.
So what I hear you saying is two different answers. Number one, things are not the puck is not where DLT is causing a change in big pharma. The puck is going to be there, and it's going to be caused due to two separate reasons. One is because this movement towards B2B2C, as you put it, and the second being just FOMO, if you will, for lack of a better term, which is people. So it's both sides of the same coin, if you will. People saying that they want to move towards that. My question for you is, then what I hear you say, and maybe I'm putting words in your mouth, but I want you to correct me if I am, is that the only way to actually cause and affect these changes is either a groundswell, which is patients saying we want this change, which to a certain level, they don't even know enough to know how this change will be caused, or a legal change, which causes or forces a change. Or a third change, I guess I just thought of, is a financial impact change, which is you start seeing the returns.
Yeah.
However, when you look at the financial impact change, my thought process would be a company that did that really, really well is Flatiron, and they sold for I think it was 1.2 billion to one of the companies, and they took Amy Abernathy from Flatiron. Then she went in, worked with the FDA, and now works at Google. And my point being, there's some knowledge there, but the problem is, and I'm sorry, I'm sort of doing a soliloquy on my own right now, but I'm trying to understand and sort of place it all together. But what I hear you saying is that, yes, Flatiron was a super success story, but the problem we would have if we start moving towards this DLT world is that a Flatiron couldn't necessarily exist in that world, because the value in Flatiron was in the data. And with DLT, the data doesn't belong to you anymore. And if so,
who is you? Is you Flatiron?
You being the pharma company.
Well, I mean, the data really never belong to the pharma company, right? Because
I negotiate these agreements every single day, and I can tell you right now it does.
Yeah. I agree with you, but that's an artificial setting, right?
Correct. I agree with that as well.
Yeah. So look, here's the thing. I'm going to keep this. You're way brighter than I am, so like the slickly and all this stuff is going to over my head. But here's the way I look at it, right? And let's bring it back to the C-level, organization. Well, leaders that we know in these kind of organizations, they're very kind of like binary. It's like, okay, is it going to improve my top line, or is it going to save me money, therefore improve my bottom line? Right? That's been the two kind of driving factors in what kind of investments you make. To me, what is happening, there's a third element, which I think we're seeing manifest in lots of other areas, which is that there's a public like groundswell of sentiment, right? That you may not necessarily be able to articulate either as a top line or a bottom line, but is actually real nonetheless, because it creates a lot of noise and unnecessary. Why you make unnecessary grief unless you're dealing with it. And I think that's really when I'm talking to clients in this space, I bring this up, which is to say, look, everybody wants to sit here, like everybody wants to look at an Excel spreadsheet and say, all right, Jim, you're asking for $1 million investment. I want to get a 10x return. Show me where I'm going to get $10 million on the top line, or show me where my cost is going to go from $1 million to 100,000 because I'm going to get that same saving. Everybody wants that, but then that's to me, that's where you've already crossed the chasm. It's already a mature, like there's no innovation involved where it's that formulaic, right? If essentially what you're doing is printing coin and it's so formulaic, then there's no innovation, there's no risk, there's nothing to do. It's just like it's coin operated, You're no longer 0 to 1. You're like, 101 to 111, right? It's already happening. But that's not the space that we're in. I think the space that we're in is much more in the 0 to 1 or like 5 to 7 range, right? It's still early. So therefore, I think people need to understand that this idea that is so formulaic that you could just say, here's an investment, here's a 10x return, isn't really there. Or maybe it's there, but we just can't articulate with that degree of certainty, right? And of course, as humans, we have that's the kind of the competing sentiments that we always deal with: certainty versus uncertainty. What I would say though is what is fairly clear is certain, or you can certainly see a lot of evidence, is groundswell of a public feeling, satisfaction versus dissatisfaction about this. Look, not to digress, but just last few days we've seen this massive Novak Djokovic things happening in Australian Open, right? So let's put it this way. If there wasn't a groundswell of a public dissatisfaction about the fact that this one guy, albeit the world number one, right, is getting a free ride. He is the one guy who's getting privileged to do what nobody else, including like none of his competitors, are able to do, which is get into the country, have some kind of a cockamamie exemption, get in, play the tournament, don't have to be vaccinated. But the groundswell of negative adverse feeling about that, I think, was, to me, just as an outsider, what was, I think, the thing that really motivated ultimately some of the politicians stepping in. Of course, there's a political angle to it. I'm not naive. But to me, I kind of see it happening in other areas, including in our mundane world of business. So I think that there's a lot to be said for that. And I think when you look at that with that lens, right, I think DLT, and why invest in DLT? Why invest in transparency? Why invest in showing you're a good actor, proving things? All this makes a lot more sense because I think people are seeking, more transparency, more monitorability, more ways to say, look, actually, the data doesn't really belong to XYZ pharma company. It's my data. Like, I'm providing it to you. It's not yours. It's not an aggregator's data. And the fact that an aggregator goes and takes a bunch of old data and puts their own proprietary ID on it and then sells it for like 100x, that doesn't mean all of a sudden that was their data. It just means they have taken advantage of a business opportunity that we have allowed to propagate, right? And I think, to me, like, that's the kind of stuff that I think about, because I think fundamentally many of those businesses add very little value, right? Especially when compared to, like, you could go and get it from the horse's mouth. Why go 15 horse farmers down the road and ask them, what was happening with the horse? You know what I'm saying? Right. So I kind of feel like those are some of the things that are happening. I think at some point we can articulate the financial, kind of value too. Like, hey, you're putting $1 million, here's a 5x, 10x. But I think by the time that happens, there's already, I think that the early mover advantage has dissipated for obvious reasons, right? So
what I hear you saying is this is the equivalent of investing into Amazon in 2005 or 2006.
Hell yeah. Yeah, no doubt. And again, there are plenty of historians who've done a really good job about this, who've looked at, in fact, I think Tim O'Reilly did this in 2004 when he coined Web 2.0, right? Because what he did was to look at the prior 10 years, 94, 95, till that time, and say, who succeeded, who didn't, right?
Right.
And then, of course, Amazon, Google, whatever. And by the way, those companies, their total investment from outside sources was minuscule compared to what crypto is getting now. I mean, it's like almost 10 to 50x more now, right? And of course, clearly 25 years on, we're way more advanced than we were back in the late 90s or, whenever. So the point is, it doesn't, I mean, you don't have to be a genius to figure out where the breadcrumbing is into this.
Well, let's explore that. So we're in the 2002 to 2005 Amazon. We know what Amazon looks like today. So we're now in the 2002 to 2005 of crypto. Well, not crypto, of DLT. What does a future version of a pharma augmented by DLT look like in, say, 2042?
Yeah, look, I mean, we'll take. There's so many examples, and not that I'm by any means an expert in every area or functional area pharma or life sciences. But let's take as example recruiting physicians to participate in clinical trials. We all know, I assume your audience also knows, that physicians are very, very critical in this life cycle of engaging patients to pharma sponsors, CROs, you name it, right? That's where the trust is, that the actual human trust is between like me to my GP, right? And then from there to engage with sponsors. But we also know, again, particularly for rare diseases and more exotic, kind of like compound discoveries, that there's a significant demand. There's a very big amount of demand. There are more and more studies, they're more and more competitive, and there's significant demand on a finite set of HCPs, right, healthcare providers, who are already completely like stressed. They have so much administrative burden, they have so much to do, that there's so much like dissatisfaction that's already going on. Again, there's a lot of evidence to back it up. So how do you engage with these people? Like, how do you make it equitable? How do you make it like a marketplace, right? Because you need them. They would like to participate, but putting them through a significant additional administrative burden, tying them to insurance and things that are like elements, financial elements or otherwise, that are kill this. That make it difficult to engage. That's not going to incentivize them. So to me, that's one example. It's a silly example.
So I just want to make sure I understand that example. Your example is that a future version might be a marketplace where physicians can say, I want to be part of this, and you can track them on the DLT and go, okay, these people are interested. So the physician recruitment process is a lot simpler.
Not just track them, incentivize them, and then allow them to kind of, again, just like any other kind of open marketplace, kind of like when you and I buy stock.
Yeah,
you have choice, right? You look at it with like various metrics and various criteria in mind. Same thing. Why wouldn't it? Why couldn't it be like that? And then you could, from there, you could trickle down. There's a transition. I think people talk about, well, we could do exactly that with patients. True, yeah. But let's be realistic. If right now, and you made a very good point, well, patients don't even know. They don't even know how to get access to healthcare records. Well, what's the next port up the road? Well, the next port, I think, is healthcare providers, and particularly trusted GPs. If you can engage them in this way, then the likelihood of them going to their patients saying, hey, look, Darshan, Jim, with your profile, we think that you should participate in this thing. It's actually fairly easy to do. I'm part of it. And you also, in turn, can get some, not only have some monetary incentives and potentially be remunerated, but also have some control, some visibility, some transparency. And oh, by the way, it goes by your consent. If you choose to remove your consent, or if there's if you want to provide continuity of consent to your next of kin or whatever, can all be done transparently, compliantly, in a way that's privacy preserving. Your healthcare records are not going to be on the internet or on a blockchain or whatever. That can be done, and we can prove it right now. Yet provide you some degree of kind of like access and control. I think is part of it. So I think that's the way I kind of see it trickling down. Could you, by luck or whatever, maybe to an advocacy group, engage a whole bunch of patients directly? Yes, probably. But I think much more realistically in this scenario for clinical research is you engage overburdened physicians who are already doing this, but make it better for them, make it a little bit simpler for them, make it more accountable for them. And then from there, you just trickle it down. I think if you look at that, the large kind of like cycle here and then all the stakeholders here, the more of this you do, the more I think embedding of this DLT technologies as a source of transparency, as a record of or system of truth, you're making that just happen, but you're making it happen, in a kind of as like an underlayer, right? Not overtly, because I don't think it makes sense. I honestly, I don't see it happening where you say, let's give every one of these physicians or patients, like electronic wallets, and let's teach them how to manage their keys and things like this. I don't think that's going to happen, and not anytime soon. I think what's going to much more likely to happen is that you have some legal fiduciaries and custodians who essentially, on behalf of the organization, like a Pfizer or a CRO, and the physicians and or the patients, provide these kind of services to make it easier, and companies like us who embed these technologies in an easier way, so people don't have to worry about the anxiety of dealing with cryptocurrencies and keys and things like this, get the benefit of it. That's what I kind of see happening over the next decade or so. I think, and eventually I think people with their phones, right, on your phone, even average people without like having a degree in cryptography can manage things like wallets and keys and stuff like that, and be usable enough to do so. But to me, that's one use case. There's many other ones. There's use cases around like supply chain and things like this too.
Yeah, I guess let me ask you a different version of that same question, and we're well past time, so let's keep this one a little tight. But in the end, we all know what the curve associated with technology is. You've got your early adopters, you've got your starters, and blah blah blah. My question: where do you think we are? How far are we from that inflection point where DLT sort of takes off for pharma? Are we 2 years away, 5 years away, or are we 10 years away? Like, if you were sort of looking at this, when do you think people are going to go, this is when I need to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good question. And if I knew the answer perfectly, I'd be betting on some things and probably retire, just like the other crypto folks into Puerto Rico, which is a whole different thing, which to me is nonsense. But regardless, honestly, my feeling is everything in healthcare and life sciences measured in units of decades.
Okay.
I know this, right? I think.
Yeah.
Even fairly, look at FHIR as an interoperability standard. It came out like in 2010, right? And it's taken like 12 years for it to be mandated, enacted, and things like this. So I think we're talking in the decade range,
Okay.
But to me, that's it is what it is. But to me, the opportunity though, and the opportunity for innovators, entrepreneurs to really ride the S curve, because
Right.
once the S curve plateaus, good luck making like real impact.
Right.
But I think we haven't crossed the chasm, right? Taking Jeffrey Moore's word, like philosophy principles, we're nowhere near crossing the chasm. But I don't think we're like the very beginning of that like journey. I think we're maybe like I don't know, a year or two, 3 or 4 before that big leap on the crossing the chasm, which to me is the opportunity to actually to be in here and build innovative solutions.
So what I hear you saying is that if you are a startup or a mid-sized company that's well-funded, if you're looking for PE investors, and those PE investors are looking for a 3x, a 5x, a 10x return in the next 3 to 5 years, you need to be in the DLT space right now so you can show them that return, because you will be ready in 3 to 5 years while the rest of the world isn't ready yet.
Honestly, I go way further than that. I would say, because we've all seen to me, like a 3x thing, we're talking private equity, and we're talking about people who fundamentally don't really care about innovation. I think if you're talking about opportunity for 1,000x, within 5 years, it's right here.
Okay, so you're saying VC
and a few 100x, and maybe many 10x, 20x, 50x.
Okay, so you're thinking at this stage we're still in the VC area, seed funding area for those people.
We're in the pre-seed area.
Oh, okay.
And I did a tweet on this just recently, actually today. I think there's a real opportunity even in the pre-seed area. Now, of course, you got to separate noise versus signal, and you need to have people who've kind of like you and I have like either become gray or lost hair or both, I just kind of know. Yeah, I know like that reflects badly on us, but kind of have been burned a couple of times to be able to advise properly. And it's not just about crypto; it's about the domain, right? I'm not, this is not like a linear or cartoonish, kind of advice. But if you have that and you get the right team, I think the opportunity is really there. And honestly, I think if people are talking 3x return, to me, that's already like cross the chasm, right? You're taking almost no risk, you're getting almost no reward.
Very, very cool. Jim, we can keep discussing this forever, and you're always fun to talk with. Couple of quick questions. How can people reach you?
Twitter, Jim Nasr at Twitter or LinkedIn, and our website, all that I think works.
Awesome. So just to be clear, because Jim's being unduly humble right now, His website's acore.com. On Twitter, you can find him at J Nasr, or you can find him on LinkedIn at J Nasr as well. What is something? Let's see. You know what? We've gone over. Well, we can always ask more questions later. Feel free to reach out to Jim. Feel free to reach out to me. We'd be happy to talk. Jim, thank you again for coming on. Any last parting words?
Okay, I actually prepared for this time because he always asks the question, what have you learned recently?
Okay, sorry. I was trying to be good and not ask you that question, but okay.
I'm going to be indulgent. I'm going to say, look, I spent several weeks over the holidays learning about the history of money and what is hard money versus other money. There's a lot going on with debasement and Bitcoin, things like this. I strongly encourage your listeners to do the same thing. It's fascinating. I'll give you a better perspective on cryptocurrency and particularly Bitcoin.
So maybe you should come on and have a discussion about that sometime soon.
Maybe.
Maybe.
We'll see if you invite me back, but maybe.
Thanks again, Jim. Good seeing you again.